Here we go. We've officially reached the Saturday mailbag phase of draft season. Welcome into Fantasy Baseball today on Saturday, March 9th. Frank Stampfl joined by Scott White and Chris Towers. Today on the show, we have our latest prospect spotlight, your mailbag questions, and a very special guest joining us later on in the podcast. Lots to get to. Let's jump right in with our prospect spotlight. It's time to discuss some of the prospects who are catching our eye from a fantasy perspective, thanks to our sponsors at Hyundai, where they're thinking about every step of your journey out on the road. Today, we're talking about Jackson Jobe, who is the Tigers' top pitching prospect and Scott's number 22 overall prospect, number 4 pitching prospect, and that's if you include Yoshinobu Yamamoto in that mix. Jackson Jobe is 21 years old, coming along very nicely. Third overall pick back in 2021 out of high school. And last year in the minors, a 2.81 ERA, .98 whip, 84 strikeouts over 64 innings. He got 1 start in at AA. Also made 4 starts in the Arizona Fall League. Did miss a chunk of time due to lumbar spine inflammation. We'll get to more of that in a bit. Has a 4-pitch mix, big fastball, big slider, 3,000 plus RPM spin rate on the slider. Scott, we'll start with you. What do you think of the overall pitching package here with Jackson Jobe?
I think it's pretty impressive. Obviously, you said where he ranked among my pitching prospects. Third, if you don't count Yoshinobu Yamamoto. So Jackson Jobe turned himself into one of the elite pitching prospects last year, which is a relief to Tigers fans because you mentioned he was taken 3rd overall in the 2021 draft. The next 3 picks in that draft were Marcelo Meyer, Colton Cowser, and Jordan Lawler. So Jackson Jobe, the high school arm, it was a risky pick at the time, but it seems like it's paid off for the Tigers. The big selling point, you talked about the slider, the 3,000 RPM. That is a ridiculous spin rate on a slider. It's a ridiculous spin rate. It's a little more common with curveballs, but it would be ridiculous for that pitch too. And what really, I think, put Jackson Jobe over the top last year was just the command he showed for having that swing and miss potential with the slider. 14-1 strikeout to walk ratio is what he put together in his 16 starts. Now, it was only 64 innings. He's still, like I said, he was drafted out of high school in 2021. So he's still early on the developmental path. And that time he missed with the back injury last year puts him even further behind in terms of like innings build up. So unless the Tigers unless they're surprise contenders this year, which I could see it. I could see enough going right for that roster that they are. I don't think they're going to fast play Jackson Jobe here. I don't expect to see him this year, maybe in September if they preserve enough innings along the way. But I think when we're talking 2025, Jackson Jobe is going to be getting the sort of buzz like Paul Skeens is getting right now, in all likelihood.
Chris, obviously we have concerns over any pitching prospects, especially ones out of high school, just trying to project them long-term. This lumbar spine inflammation, it kind of adds an extra element here of things we potentially need to worry about. How much does it worry you long-term with someone like Jackson Jobe?
Yeah, I mean, the concern level with any, I believe he's a 21-year-old starting pitcher.
Yep.
The concern level with any 21-year-old starting pitcher, especially one who hasn't made it through a full season, is just, can they do it? Can the arm hold up? And the arm injuries haven't been the issue for Jackson Jobe so far in his professional career. It's been that back issue that's been recurring. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, though, because every young pitcher has the potential for arm issues. The fact that he has a different injury that has hindered him so far in his professional career, I think it's a little concerning. He's also had some trouble keeping the ball in the yard, 1.3 home runs per 9, 1.6 in his first year. So, not a perfect profile, but there's a lot to like here, certainly. And if he makes it through this year without issue and gets up to, probably 110, 120 innings, he got to 79.2 last year. If you include the Arizona Fall League, I think we're talking about someone who absolutely has the potential to be a fantasy difference maker in 2025. Like Scott said, given the lack of workload, given that he's only made one start above high A, I think it's probably unlikely that Jackson Jobe makes much of an impact for fantasy this season. But as I always say, once you get to double A, I think you're always, a good month and a half and an injury away from having an opportunity. So I'm kind of the opinion that once a team thinks a guy is major league ready, they should probably just be in the majors because there's no point in wasting bullets in the minors. And obviously not every team agrees with me. Look at the Pirates with Paul Skeens, but it's a situation where I wouldn't be shocked if Jackson Jobe got called up by June. It's kind of similar to where Yuri Perez was at this time last year.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you guys. I think it's probably unlikely that we see him, but yeah, I kind of think the Tigers could be in a mix for a wild card spot this year. So maybe later in the season, if pitching injuries just kind of add up and they need more arms and they need an extra punch to that rotation. Obviously, it looks like Jackson Jobe will be able to provide that. So lots of strikeout upside here, maybe long-term, some injury risk, but yeah, there is a lot to like with Jackson Jobe of the Detroit Tigers. Thanks again to Hyundai for sponsoring this segment and the show. Learn more at HyundaiUSA.com. And remember, if you want to hear more about a specific top prospect on a future mailbag, leave us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, drop the prospect's name in the review, and we will get to it on a future show. Real quick, some things to promote. Make sure to sign up for the FBT newsletter, cbssports.com/newsletters. If you're watching on YouTube, you can scan that QR code that will take you right to the website. Hit that FBT logo, punch in your email address. It's easy as that. It's free. Obviously, Chris puts a lot of work into it and does a great job. So make sure to support that and download our 5-minute podcast, FBT in 5, wherever you listen to this podcast. Let's get into the mailbag questions, and we will start with our Apple Podcast reviews. This one's from Kramer J33. 12-team head-to-head categories with OBP instead of batting average and pitcher losses instead of whip. 3-year max, 1-round penalty for years kept. Based on previous year's draft position, saves are scarce. Most teams roster 3 to 4 closers. Keep 3. Freddie Freeman in the 1st, George Kirby in the 12th, Gunnar Henderson in the 5th, Camilo Duvall in the 15th, Nico Horner in the 17th, Riley Green in the 14th.
Freddie Freeman.
Yeah.
Kirby.
That whip or losses instead of whip kind of makes me just want to not worry too much about starting pitchers. I don't know. I don't know how to deal with that one.
It does hurt Kirby a little bit because his whip is so good, but I think ERA and the win should be pretty good for Kirby too. So
yeah, but look at what else is out there.
Yeah.
He's saying saves are scarce. So throwing back a 15th round Camilo Duvall might not be something he could do. He's got Nico Horner, who tends to go in round 6, 7. He's got him as a 17th rounder. Probably loses a little bit of value since it's OBP instead of batting average, but
his OBP should be fine.
It should be mid 300, 346 last year. And obviously he's going to be a lot of stolen bases, eligible at both middle infield spots. I don't know. I think and then Gunnar Henderson in round 5. That's obviously good value too. I'm eliminating Riley Green as much as you like him, Chris.
No, I agree with that. Yeah.
But the other 5, Freddie Freeman's obvious. You have to keep him. So Kirby, Henderson, Duvall, and Horner. You need to keep 2 of those. Again, it's Kirby in the 12th, Henderson in the 5th, Duvall in the 15th, Horner in the 17th. I don't think you can go wrong.
I will say,
if this person has a top pick in the draft, what if you throw Freeman back, you draft him, and then I would just go with Kirby, Duvall, and Horner?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Yeah,
he has the number 1 pick in the draft?
No, we don't know that. But I'm saying if this person has a top, it's hard to project because you don't know who's.
If you have anything less than the number, you got to assume all the Freeman caliber players are being kept. I mean, if they're not, then, and you'll have your choice of other first round caliber players in round 1, then yeah, you could get away with doing that and take advantage of some of these discounts. And now that I'm thinking about it a little more, only 3 keepers. He said saves are scarce. I was kind of thinking that means all the closers are being kept. If only three closers are being kept, not that many closers. If only three players are being kept, not that many closers are. So I think you can throw Camilo Duvall back.
Can I just put one thing out here? And this is true across fantasy sports. I think having losses as a category is bad. You should not penalize, because you look at like the players who lose the most games. Obviously, bad pitchers on bad teams are going to lose a lot of games. Good pitchers are going to lose their share of games too.
I think Logan Webb had more losses than wins last year.
Yeah, like it just the problem with this, it's kind of like in fantasy basketball when turnovers are one of the 9 categories. And it's like,
hate it.
The best players have the ball in their hands more. Turnovers as a category is mostly just diminishing the value of the best players. I don't know. I don't love the idea of having losses as a distinct category.
All right, we got to move on from this one. So I'm just going to say Freeman, Kirby, and Horner.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the same. This next one's from DJ. I am in a dynasty league with minor league rosters. My question is, during our first-year player draft, how do you weigh a draft pick against a post-hype sleeper like Brett Beatty or Ricky Tiedemann? I managed to get both of those guys for essentially a second and third round pick. I missed out on some nice prospects like Noble Meyer of the Marlins and Kyle Teal of the Red Sox. So what I would say is to use Scott's top 100 prospect list, because they do have other top prospects. They have first-year player drafts, so you first-year players, so you can kind of see where they all kind of rank together. And
now Beatty is not on that list, right?
He's not on that list. That is correct.
Yeah.
I was going to point that out.
I didn't know first-year player drafts could have players who weren't first-year player. I see what he's saying.
It could just
you're
be
drafting from among the leftovers here.
It could just be a minor league draft, kind of similar to your, the Scott White Dynasty League, right? Scott?
I have Tiedemann as a much higher prospect than Meyer and Teal, to your point. So that would be an easy one. Beatty, since he's not listed among my prospects because he doesn't qualify as a prospect anymore, it's not as obvious, but I think Meyer is so far away as another pitcher drafted straight out of high school that like the range of outcomes is so wide. I don't think he's on the same level as Beatty in a league like this. And Kyle Teal, just the fact that he's a catcher, pretty high floor catcher prospect because his hit tool is so good. And there's a good chance he's up for the Red Sox this year, I think. So it's a closer call between Kyle Teal and Brett Beatty, but just as a rule, when it's a catcher versus something else, I'd take the something else. So now, Tiedemann and Beatty.
I will say Noble Meyer, I believe, has thrown more than 5 innings in a start as a professional, or has thrown 5 innings in a start as a professional as many times as Ricky Tiedemann has. I believe that stat is correct. And sorry. No, Ricky Tiedemann has never thrown more than 5 innings.
That sounds right.
And last year, he did not throw 5 innings in a single start.
So are you saying Ricky Tiedemann is not the obvious?
No, I think he is. I just want to it's important context because there's a lot of hype around Ricky Tiedemann, and I think it's worth noting.
This next one's from Mike in Philly. Pick 2 pitchers and 2 hitters to keep in a 12-team head-to-head 6x6 league with OBP instead of batting average. Total bases, K per 9, quality starts, and net saves. All right. Hitters, Corbin Carroll in the 3rd, Gunnar Henderson in the 7th, Lars Nootbaar in the 11th, Trevor Story in the 20th, and Bryson Stott in the 21st. Pitchers, Kevin Gausman in round 4, Grayson Rodriguez in round 15, Yuri Perez in round 22, and Mitch Keller also in round 22.
Carroll and Henderson are the easy calls. You're getting 2 high-level players at, even if it was a slight discount, it'd be worth keeping them. They're both pretty significant discounts. So those 2 guys. Then I would go Yuri Perez in the 22nd and
Grayson.
I would go Grayson in the 15th. Scott, I would imagine you would go Keller in the 22nd.
I'd go Grayson in the 15th. Yeah, especially if it's a situation where the discount carries over from year to year. Yeah, I rank Grayson Rodriguez higher than Keller in redraft leagues, and I think when you're talking round 15 for Grayson versus round 22 for Keller, it's 7 rounds. I understand, but it's so late for both.
Yeah,
I'll take Grayson over.
The difference between a 15th round pick and a 22nd round pick is marginal at best.
This next one's from Vote Rifu. Not sure if I got that right. I have a 10-team ESPN points league, which I believe is -1 for strikeouts. So I guess keep that in mind. I also pick 7th in every round. So it doesn't snake. All right, that's interesting. Pick 3 between Julio Rodriguez, Corbin Carroll, Spencer Strider, and Corbin Burns. It's a pretty good group.
Well, definitely Corbin Carroll. Definitely Spencer Strider. It comes down to J-Rod and Burns. And, normally in a traditional fantasy league, even one of our standard head-to-head points leagues where it's just minus half a point for hitter strikeouts, I would say Julio Rodriguez, of course. He's a first rounder. Burns is at best a second rounder. But when you when you penalize hitters a full point for a strikeout instead of half a point, some of those bad plate discipline guys get crushed as a result of it. And Julio Rodriguez is a bad plate discipline guy. I'm in a league like this, so I'm trying to pull open last year's stats real quick to see where Julio Rodriguez finished. He was the 6th best outfielder. 455 fantasy points is how many he scored. I know the scoring might be a little different. Versus Corbin Burns, who scored 542 fantasy points. So Burns scored more in this particular league. I still think I'd go Julio Rodriguez, just given the scarcity of the outfielders, but it's a closer call between those two when it's minus a full point for strikeouts.
So here's the fun thing. In standard ESPN scoring last year, Corbin Burns scored 432 points. Julio Rodriguez scored 431.
Okay.
Now, I personally expect Corbin Burns to be better than he was last season. I'm not sure I necessarily expect Julio Rodriguez to be better than he was last season. It very well could happen. It's within the realm of possibility, but I'm mostly expecting him to stay pretty steady. So I would go Burns over J-Rod in that instance.
It's also not just a matter of who scores the most points. They play different
right.
positions. The standard for replacement player is different.
Yeah, I think
positions.
I wrote about this the other day. I think of the top 50 scorers in ESPN's format last year, only 15 were pitchers, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, it's hard to know exactly what the scoring system is. Admittedly, I don't play in any points leagues on ESPN, but I know a lot of people do. And we have a question coming up a little bit later on about the different rankings across the major sites, CBS, Yahoo, and ESPN. We'll get to that later on. Let's take our first break. And after this, we will get to some fantasy justice here on Fantasy Baseball Today.
The blackout mystery remains.
Welcome to March Madness. You just never know in the tournament who is going to shine.
Stream March Madness live on any device, anywhere, and be ready for anything.
Welcome back in. This next question is from Stonecutter01, who needs fantasy justice. If you have a question that's not player related or strategy related, if it's something that's going wrong in your league, send that in. Use the subject fantasy justice in the email, whatever it might be, and we'll get to a few of those on future mailbags as well. Dear Robert, Alan, and Francis. Chris, you are muted, but
I have no idea.
I only know who it is because of they included it in the question. I'll get to that in just a second. My question is, in the circumstance of a draft where a manager mispicks or freezes and then auto picks a player he does not want, then several teams pick after, what is the proper procedure? Now, I know that there are some sticklers for this out there. Scott, in every league that I've ever done with you, you are pretty understanding if someone picks the wrong player or if there's some kind of like weird computer thing that happens and whatever, we have to back things out. The one thing I would say about this is if multiple picks happen after something goes wrong, I think you still need to honor those picks. So if
definitely
back to someone else who needs to, they mispicked, they cannot pick any of the players that went after their pick. That's what I would say personally.
Agreed.
Yeah, I agree with that part. So I would say that the further away you get from the pick being made, the less forgiving you need to be. So like if the pick just happened and the person said, no, wait, I messed that up, basically any reason they want to back it out. If it doesn't seem like a very good reason, I might be kind of like, but okay. I might be begrudgingly back it out and let them redo it. But if 9 picks happen after that I think it's a difference of, whoops, I didn't mean to take that guy, versus my computer crashed and I've spent the last 10 minutes trying to log back in. You know, if it's my computer crashed and I spent the last 10 minutes trying to log back in, then I think, okay, you swap out the pick, you let everybody who picked afterward keep the player they wanted. But you know, it's a different standard, I think, the further away from the pick you get. But yeah, as a general rule, I'd like to be very forgiving, because, you know, that's the kind of thing that can just totally ruin the experience for a person. And it's not worth that, you know, like, okay, so maybe they made a bad pick and it improves your state because they made a bad pick and now they want to, because the timer ran out on them or whatever. Haha, sucks for them. But like, is that really how you want to beat them anyway? Is just because of an administrative error like that? Don't you want to beat them when they were putting together the best team they and getting the actual player they want and putting together the best team they could? That's how I've always thought of it.
I agree.
And yeah, it's just not worth creating a lot of frustration and animosity by being a stickler over a timer, which is mostly there just to keep the draft moving.
Robert, Allen, and Francis. Robert Manfred, Allen Bud Selig, Francis Vincent. Those are the names that we were looking for, and fantasy justice has been served. This next one's from K Good Friend. I am in a 10-team head-to-head points league. It's a keeper/dynasty league where every year we add an additional hitter and pitcher keeper to our teams. I am torn on who I should keep for my hitter. Jackson Holiday as a second rounder. I have 2 second-round picks, so all right, might look at that as a luxury. Or Spencer Torkelson in the 7th. I think I'd still rather do Torkelson.
Hang on, I'm trying to catch up to the details here. Every year we add an additional hitter and pitcher keeper to our teams. I feel like I'm missing a lot of pertinent information here. Like, I let me say this: the less turnover there is in the league, the more likely I would lean Jackson Holiday, who I think could be your best player within a couple years. And I don't think that's likely for Spencer Torkelson, even though the discount, it's not, you know, Holiday as a second round pick, it's not a discount at all. But in a dynasty league with little roster turnover, you could argue he's a top 15, 20 dynasty asset already. So it would make sense that you'd use a second round pick to keep him. But if it's a league where, you know, just like 5, 6, less than 10 players, let's say, are being kept, that would mean more roster turnover. That would mean you don't have to be so long-term focused. So maybe in that case, it makes more sense to take Torkelson. The fact you're calling it a dynasty league leads me to believe Holiday is the best.
Also, I have the 4th overall pick in our draft, and our league is skewed towards pitching. My heart is telling me to take Matt Olson, but my brain is telling me to take the best pitcher available, which it looks like it would be Kevin Gausman or Tarek Skubal. Any suggestions?
My brain and heart tell me to take Olson.
Homer. But yes, I would do the same thing. So
yeah, I mean, I guess it depends what it means by skewed towards pitching. Like, are pitchers much more valuable in this format than they are in normal ones, or do pitchers just tend to not be available? Because if it's the former, and there's a reasonable chance that Gausman could outscore Matt Olson, then I might be inclined to just go with Matt Olson, or with Gausman. But if it's just that pitchers are a little more scarce, then I'd still take the best player.
This next one's from Matt in Knoxville. Dear Bobby, Billy, Happy, and Nikki.
Those sound like title characters for Adam Sandler movies.
4 characters from the only 4 movies Frank has ever watched.
There you go.
Right. The comedic genius Adam Sandler, by the way. 12-team head-to-head categories league. I can keep 4 of the following: Tarek Skubal, Cole Reagans, Jazz Chisholm, O'Neal Cruz, JT Realmuto, and Nolan Jones. I'm already keeping 2 pitchers and 4 hitters.
Okay. You should keep
Skubal, Jones, Reagans, and Jones.
We keep talking at the exact same time. Yes, Skubal, Nolan Jones, Cole Reagans, and what'd you say, O'Neal Cruz?
I'd go Jazz Chisholm over O'Neal Cruz, but I think that one's close enough that it's basically a coin flip.
Yeah, I'd prefer Cruz, but fair enough.
I think I would go with Cruz over Jazz, but yeah, that is really close. Let's get into our email questions, fantasybaseball@cbsi.com. This one's from Anthony, looking for some advice on how to navigate the back third of the draft. Typically, you've advised the best approach is to filling your bench is to go heavy pitching. When you get to the later rounds in the draft, do you typically prioritize filling your starting hitter spots before pitcher depth, or are you comfortable filling your final utility spots within the last few picks? How do you balance navigating back end pitcher depth versus starting level bats? So this is more of a strategy question. I think there's a lot of nuance involved based on what type of league that you're playing in. Mm-hmm. I think in a head-to-head points league, I try to fill up the bench with as much pitchers as possible. Maybe I'll take one kind of upside hitter for the bench. The rest is going to be pitching. But, in like a typical Roto League 15 team, we just finished up our TGFBI drafts, the Great Fantasy Baseball Invitational. There are 7 bench spots, and I think I had 3 pitchers and 4 hitters, right? Like just kind of a mix of upside. So I don't know.
Yeah, and those really deep Roto leagues, the 15 teamers, the people, there's such an emphasis on getting pitching on your bench that there just aren't enough to go around. So it's hard to get more than 2 or 3. In a shallow head-to-head points league where, head-to-head points is the format where you most need pitching depth. Obviously, it just depends on how the build is going. But I would say it's not uncommon in a head-to-head points league with, 9 hitter spots in the lineup for me to have at least one of those hitter spots, maybe even 2, because catcher's always one, I guess. So 2 of those hitter spots, maybe my catcher and my third outfielder, to keep them open for a while, even as I'm filling out my bench. So I might have 8 starting pitchers, the 5 in my lineup and 3 on my bench before I take my third outfielder, just because you reach a point in the outfield rankings where there's not a lot of differentiation. And because it's a 3 outfielder league, there's not a lot of demand for what's the guy's name on the Astros? What's his name? The McCormick, Chas McCormick type. Like, is there that much difference between Chas McCormick and now I got to come up with another name.
I don't know. Masataka Yoshida.
Sure, that's a good one. Thank you. Gosh. Yeah, is there that much difference between those 2 in a head-to-head points league that you really need to take one 4 rounds ahead of the another? No, there's not. So I'm probably taking pitchers at that point instead. I need to stop talking. It's not going well.
All right, so Chris, you can answer this next question from John. If you customize the roster to allow larger squads, how would you adjust the salary cap from what seems to be the $260 standard? I am a commissioner of a league that is head-to-head most categories, and we're switching to auction drafting this year. We've been going on 10 years and have adjusted our roster to hold more relief pitchers for saves plus holds category, extra outfielder, 2 catchers, etc. In short, we have 26 starters, 15 hitters, and 11 pitchers. 4 bench spots. Would you advise a $260 budget or $300 or $340 cap? Other. And Chris, 260, I don't know how we got to that number. I'm sure some fantasy baseball historian somewhere knows the reason behind $260. But as long as I've played, that is the standard. And it doesn't really change like across formats. If you're playing a 15-team roto, it's 260. If you're playing a 12-team points league, it's 260. So that's just kind of what I'm used to.
Yeah, and the thing to keep in mind is every dollar that you add to the pool is almost certainly going to go to the high-end players and not the low-end players, right? So, like, if you go up to 300, what that probably means is that Ronald Acuna goes for $75 and not that Brian De La Cruz goes for 5 instead of 1. Like that's, I think, the way to think about it. So
good job pulling out random names there. That was...
Thank you.
That were appropriate for the point you were making. That was very good. That's a rare skill.
When I think about this question, you're talking about 3 extra starters relative to a traditional Roto League, which is $260 for 23 starters, I think 260 is fine. Like, ultimately, it doesn't matter, right? Like, I'm in a football league where everyone decided they wanted more money to spend during the auctions. So we raised our budget from 100 to 120. It doesn't really, like, everybody still has the same amount of money. Everybody still has to distribute the same amount of money across the same roster spots. I don't really think it matters. And given that you're only talking about 3 extra roster spots, I think 260 is perfectly fine.
And as we mention a lot on the podcast, whenever we're talking about salary cap leagues, auction leagues, go to fangraphs.com, hover over their projections tab, and use their auction calculator. You can punch in any type of league settings, however many spots you have, different categories, and it will punch out, it will reveal what the salary cap values, the auction values are for players in that format. So again, it's an invaluable tool, and I would recommend it to everybody. This next one's from Kyle, who says, glad to be back with you for another season. Well, thank you, Kyle. I am wondering who you are viewing as a better late round bounce back candidate between Christian Javier and Tristan McKenzie.
They're not priced the same, are they?
I don't think so. I think Javier is going a bit higher.
Yeah. Well, closer than I thought. Within 50 picks of each other, it looks like.
Okay.
But McKenzie later. McKenzie did have his spring debut and just the other day, and I don't think there were any velocity readings available.
No,
just anecdotally, it went well. So I was kind of not even interested in him at all. McKenzie, who dealt with elbow and shoulder problems last year, I believe, until I saw him back pitching again and could at least have the faith that he was going to step on a mound at some point this year. So that renewed my interest slightly, but I still have Christian Javier way higher in my rankings.
I mean, Javier was better in 2022. I know McKenzie pitched more innings, but on a per inning basis, Javier was quite a bit better.
And strikeout rate has always been better for Javier. I feel like people are being a little too dismissive of Javier overall. I understand last year went poorly and there were some issues with his fastball shape, which was really the whole strength. The strength of his arsenal was the fastball shape. So if he lost that, you understand why he struggled to the extent he did. But there's evidence that later in the season, he began to fix it again. I know he lost a lot of weight this offseason, hoping that would help lock in his mechanics better, because he just kind of lost his mechanics last year, and that's fixable. That's very fixable. I don't think Christian Javier's decline last year is one of those declines where it's like, okay, his skills have diminished and there's no way he could get this back. I think it's more like he was doing something wrong and he needs to figure out what he was doing wrong and start doing it right again. And I think there's a pretty good chance of that happening.
And he doesn't have the injury concerns that Tristan McKenzie does. And Christian Javier's velocity was up so far in spring. He averaged 93.7 with his four-seam fastball on today's Thursday, right? Thursday.
When we're recording this.
Yes, as we're recording, he was pitching. His velocity was up about 1 mile per hour with his fastball. So I think that's a good sign. I'd much rather have Christian Javier than Tristan McKenzie.
The only thing with Javier that worries me is that he is a 2-pitch pitcher, and like Joe Ryan, he kind of relies on this deceptive rising fastball. And if there's anything off with the fastball like we saw last year, he just crumbles. And so I can't get that out of my mind.
There's downside risk for sure.
There's downside risk.
That's why he's going as late as he is. But I think it's too late considering the upside potential.
There's downside for both of them. But what I was going to ask is, if I guaranteed 160 innings for each of them, does that change the calculation? Because if I knew for sure McKenzie was on the mound for the same amount as Javier, I might actually take McKenzie.
I think Javier is a better pitcher. I had McKenzie as a bust candidate last year. I think he's got the fastball. He's got 2 good breaking balls. The fastball is a decent pitch, but it's not a great one. I have concerns about his arsenal and how effective he's going to be. As much as I am, really rooting for Tristan McKenzie, I think he's there's pretty significant performance risk there for him as well.
Yeah, I'd prefer Javier even giving them an equal number of innings. Yes.
All right, this last question we're going to get to is from Sean, Deere, Carmen, Sydney, and Richie.
Oh, the Bear.
That's correct. I haven't watched it, but I've heard.
It's phenomenal.
Hey, gang, one of my favorite pieces that you put out every year is the one covering site ADP gaps between the big three of CBS, ESPN, and Yahoo. While I love the CBS format and obviously the show, 2 of my 3 leagues have unfortunately not seen the light. However, I was wondering if you could specifically spotlight some of the consensus FBT loves that just can't be loved as deeply over on those other sites. I'll admit Cole Reagans is a big inspiration for this question. And Chris, this is where I throw it over to you because I know you just wrote multiple articles covering this topic.
Yeah, so this was Wednesday's FBT newsletter, I believe I wrote about it, and the site, the stores are on the site. Best values at CBS, ESPN, and Yahoo. Worst values at each as well. There's 2 different pieces. I don't know how do you want to discuss it?
So, I mean, this particular question, I guess, is asking about players that we love that maybe they're ranked too high on the other sites, I guess, because that admits Cole Reagans is a big inspiration for this. So
I don't really get that because I got ADP pulled open here now, and Reagans goes earlier on our site than any of the others.
Yeah.
Maybe,
So
maybe it's okay. Players that we have higher on CBS that are ranked lower on other sites.
All right. So the players who are being drafted highest on ESPN relative to the other formats, I compared each site to the Fantasy Pros consensus, and some patterns emerge when you look at ESPN in particular. Stephen Kwan, Keibert Ruiz, Luis Arias, Jung-Hoo Lee, Ketel Marte, like extreme contact-oriented hitters tend to be way more expensive on ESPN for, I think, obvious reasons, as we talked about earlier, that you get the extra penalty for strikeouts in that format. Even then, though, like Stephen Kwan's ADP on ESPN is 69th. That's just a bad value. Like even knowing the difference in scoring format,
So we're talking ADP here versus rankings. I mean, I guess it comes out about the same, right?
Yeah,
like,
I'm looking at the ADP at each site.
ADP
compared
on
to
a
the
particular
fantasy
site
score.
is more or less going to align to the default rankings
Yeah.
in that draft room.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so and ESPN doesn't have Roto ADP; they only have head-to-head points ADP.
I'm pretty sure points are their
That's their
dominant
default.
form. Yeah, their default. So, and it's -1 for a strikeout. So that's why those players get pushed up in that format.
Yeah, it's a little hard to compare across formats like that because I assume all the other ADP data from the other sites is for Roto leagues, 5x5 categories leagues.
So I believe Yahoo's default is head-to-head categories. CBS is head-to-head points. ESPN is head-to-head points. So,
I don't know on Fantasy Pros they got our Roto ADP up here.
Fair.
They don't have our head-to-head points.
Chris, was there any other names that you wanted to?
I don't know how helpful this discussion is for anyone.
So,
listening.
yeah, I mean, I'll just
articles.
name some players who are overvalued on Yahoo as well. Kerry Carpenter is 40 spots higher in Yahoo ADP. Brandon Pfaadt, Tyler O'Neill, Shane Boz. Shane Boz is 197 at Yahoo. I think that's probably too rich a price to pay, especially in a shallower league like that. Robert Stevenson, James Outman, Justin Turner, Giancarlo Stanton, Josh Young, and Carlos Correa are all going higher at Yahoo. Would you like to know some players who are going lower?
Yes.
In those leagues. Okay, at ESPN, it's a lot of guys who strike out a lot. Noelvi Marte, O'Neill Cruz, Tyler O'Neill, Josh Lowe, Jazz Chisholm, CJ Abrams. I actually think CJ Abrams is a really good value at ESPN. He's 137. Wow. So I like that one. Jordan Walker's 199 over there. And then a couple pitchers. Shane Boz is 321 at ESPN. I think that's actually a good value. Didn't like him on Yahoo. And Aaron Savale is 314 at ESPN. So I think that's a pretty good value. And then at Yahoo, Mitch Garver's 400th in ADP at Yahoo. I know it's a one catcher default for their head-to-head categories leagues, but he's still a top 12 catcher for me. I know he is for Scott as well. Frank, I don't know if he is for you, but that just...
I have him a little bit lower, but I think I have him higher than 400.
Yeah, if I'm... And Bo Naylor is also a very good value. Those make sense given that it's a one catcher. Jaron Duran is 269 at Yahoo. That's great value even in a 3 outfielder league. Jamer Candelario 283, Trevor Story 282, Lars Nootbaar, Wyatt Langford is still only 219 And Brian Bayo is actually maybe the most undervalued pitcher at Yahoo. 287 ADP for Brian Bayo. So I like that one.
Who just signed an extension with the Red
Yes.
Sox, and someone that I do like. I wrote him up in my Breakouts 2.0. So let's go, Brian Bayo. Let's take our final break. When we return, we will be joined by a special guest here on Fantasy Baseball Today.
CBS celebrates Women's History Month.
Welcome back in, and we would like to welcome to the show a very special guest, one that was one of our Fantasy Football Today Draft-a-thon winners. Welcome to the show, Mike Meyer. What's going on, Mike?
Hey, guys. How are you?
Doing very well. Thanks again, obviously, for contributing to a great cause with the FFT Draft-a-thon. All of the proceeds went to St. Jude Children's Hospital. Few things before we start here. Mike is a Red Sox fan, so I just have to throw that out. First and foremost, I was already on the fence.
All right. You're a Yankees fan, all right? Don't act like you're any better.
But his birthday was yesterday, so I'll let him slide. Happy birthday, Mike.
Hey, thank you. Appreciate it.
I also appreciate Mike because he basically made the rundown for this appearance. So, yes, anybody who wants to make the rundown, you're welcome to come on the show because it's a very daunting task. Let's start with the first topic here and multiple topics on trades. So Scott wrote an amazing article on trades. It was voted the article of the year, the fantasy baseball article of the year by the Fantasy Sports Writers Association, and how the landscape has changed over the years. So let's just kind of run through a few of these topics here. And Mike, I'll start with you, and then we can kind of open up a roundtable discussion. Trade etiquette. That's the first thing, right? It's like the appropriate amount of time that one should be required to respond to a trade. If you get a bad trade, some people, someone will send a trade. Hey, I'll offer you my, I don't know, Masataka Yoshida. That's the name today. For Corbin Carroll. Obviously, that's a terrible trade. Someone responds, wow, well, I'm just going to offer you the worst player on my team for the best player on yours. And that's not cool. So Mike, talk to me about trade etiquette.
Yeah, so I play in a league that has quite a few trades. It's a dynasty league. So, of course, guys halfway through the year tend to, make the decision, hey, I'm not in it this year. Let me go for next year. But there seems to be this, circumstance where you send somebody an offer preseason and it just sits there. And so the question becomes, how much time is an appropriate amount of time to either A, wait for a response, B, withdraw your offer and move on to another trade target potentially, or, just a general, hey, what should we be looking at? If we're dealing with engaged owners with cell phones nowadays, everybody's getting the message. You get the trade, do something. Either, hey, quick text message of, hey, I got your offer, I'm reviewing it, or you're insane, I'm not trading Corbin Carroll for Masataka Yoshida. So what do you think is good etiquette? What's a good time frame?
Yeah, so I think if you see the trade offer, and you probably do see the trade offer the day it's made, you get an email alert and everything. I think if you don't like it, hit reject. Spare everybody the pain of thinking it's going somewhere. If you like it, but you're not sure about it, or let's say you're just not sure about it, whatever. You need some time to think about it. Send the owner a message letting them know, hey, I got your trade offer. I'm not totally sure I'm into it, but I want to think about it a little longer. Can I let you know whenever? Give them a time frame. It doesn't have to be like there's this universal time frame, but just communicate. Don't ignore it. That's part of. I mean, this was one of the things that I brought up in the article about what's made trading so much more frustrating. Is just that. Yeah, I think too often. Too many trade responses go unanswered. And I presume it's because they didn't like the trade and just didn't bother to click decline. But you can't know for sure if there's no communication. Maybe they did. Maybe they are just thinking about it. And so if it's an offer that you still want to be a part of, you have to consider you don't want to take it back if it's something that they are thinking about.
Chris, why are you laughing?
We got a child in the background. I think Scott got a little distracted.
I did. Yeah, to deal with that real quick. Be
That's
right.
all good. It's all good. Yes, you do that, and we'll be back. That was hilarious. First time we've seen little Scott here on the show, so that's a first. That's great. Let's talk a little bit about trade strategy, and Mike, maybe some things that come to mind for you, or things that you think about when kind of forming your trades. Any strategies that you use? What do you have there?
Sure. So I think one of the things is to know the owners in your league, if that's possible. If it's a public league that you just joined, it's probably not as easily accessed. But, for example, knowing that, Frank, you're a Yankees fan, or Chris with the Marlins, or Scott with the Braves, is it a world where we can sort of take advantage or not take advantage, but, have a different strategy? Knowing that I'm a Red Sox fan, I may value Tyler O'Neill more than I value Gleyber Torres, that type of thing. So, what are some other strategies involved other than knowing your owners and knowing sort of their MLB allegiance, or is it not a factor at all?
Chris, what do you think about?
Yeah, I think, once you've played in a league with people for long enough, you do start to notice certain trends and certain quirks that everybody has in terms of the players that they target and the players that they avoid.
This is a very eventful podcast. We have kids, we have cat feeders going on.
I think I heard Scott's text notifications earlier too. So
this is why we normally
up the bingo board today
in the wee hours of the morning, where there can be no interruptions, no distractions. Yeah, sorry about that.
So you like, there's always one person in your league who really likes prospects, and there's always one person in your league who it seems like hasn't really watched baseball in the last 3 years, and so they draft the best players from 3 years ago. You guys know what I'm talking about. That happens in every draft. And so, yeah, knowing your league beyond just who you're playing with, but obviously knowing who you're playing with, knowing the settings, all that stuff is always super important for drafting, for trading, etc. So yeah, I think that's absolutely a big deal, is knowing what type of player the people in your league tend to value or undervalue.
This was another one of the frustrations raised in my article, though, is that it's harder to find differentiation. It's harder to find true agreement, like a challenge trade with people than it used to be, because information has gotten so much better over the years, and fantasy players, just as a general rule, are much sharper than they used to be. Everybody kind of, there's a lot more consensus about player values. And so if you can find an avenue of differentiation there, like a path where you two can come together on liking different players more, then I think that's invaluable. And that's really a big part of making a trade work these days.
It's really hard to find people now who, like, at last year's All-Star break, viewed Bryce Elder as an ace. Like, it just doesn't happen anymore. And so when we say sell high, well, if every single fantasy analyst is calling a player a sell high, and every single article that you read says sell high on them, people are going to be hesitant to buy. And so it's a real problem, not just in fantasy. That's a problem in professional sports. Every player is valued similarly. Like, most teams look at things in a very similar way. So you don't really have a lot of situations where one team just way under or overvalues a player. It just doesn't really happen anymore.
Look at Blake Snell and Cody Bellinger. There wasn't a team out there willing to give them the $250 million contract or whatever it was that they were looking for.
Yeah, that's exactly the example that I was going to bring up. So I agree completely there. Mike, you have a question here regarding prospects and trading in keeper dynasty leagues. And Scott, I know you have lots of thoughts on this, and it's very league dependent. How many players are you keeping? How deep is the league? So on and so forth. But Mike, do you have a preference, or do you like to acquire prospects? Do you have a strategy yourself when it comes to either trading, acquiring, or keeping prospects year over year?
Yes. So the league I mentioned before, it's 5x5 roto, 15 teams with a 17-round draft at the end of it. So it's very deep. 40 players are rostered per team. So you get way down in the player pool. One of the things that I kind of look at, a lot of guys will take prospects in the draft portion of that after the auction is completed. I tend to look at prospects as sort of commodities or collateral. So if you get yourself in a position, in mid-season where you're sort of, hey, I have a shot at winning this, players are performing, or you've gotten a lot of value, you can kind of use these guys as trade chips to say, all right, I'm all in, I'm going to go for the title, or hey, you know what, I'm not in it, I have a bunch of prospects, let me start building for next year, whether that's trading those guys or not. But what ends up kind of being the question is, with prospects, you never know. For every Corbin Carroll, there's a Joe Adell that just doesn't come to fruition as you would hope it to be. So, what are the thoughts on, depending on where you're at, is it contingent on that only, or do you just hold and hope for the best with a Fernando Tatis as a prospect?
So we were just talking about market inefficiencies and how it's harder to find those on the trade market, but prospects can be one. This is something I've noticed in different dynasty formats I play in, is that just by virtue of labeling it a dynasty league, people assume prospects have as much value as they do in real life. And depending on the setup of that dynasty league, they don't. And that's actually kind of why I set up the Scott White Dynasty League the way that I do, is I wanted to make it so that prospects genuinely did have as much value as they do in real life. And you're not seeing people oversell prospects in a way that doesn't really make sense to the rules. And I think the key distinction there is, how much does it cost to keep this prospect early in his career? What makes tanking, I guess is what people call it now, is what makes it such a viable strategy in MLB is that if you get this rush of prospects on your roster at once, well, suddenly you have a nucleus that's dirt cheap, and you can fill in, you can add more money at that point to make it a super team where you got your best players are dirt cheap, and then you're bringing in some more expensive players who are also really good, and that's how you get this juggernaut.
You can afford
last
to
for several years.
You can afford to quote unquote overpay.
Right, exactly, which is what people say the free agent market always is, an overpay. So for that to apply in a dynasty league, it has to be set up the same way so that prospects, even once they get to a point where you can use them, they are dirt cheap to keep for at least 3 years. And if it's not set up that way, then prospects don't have as much value in real life. And I think it makes more sense if that market inefficiency exists, where people are overvaluing prospects just because they're prospects and just because it's a dynasty league, then yeah, you can take advantage of it and mostly use prospects as currency.
I agree. I at least in ours, I see a lot of guys, they want to be right. They want to, hey, I tabbed that guy. I've had him on my roster for 2 years and now he's an all-star. Your Gunnar Hendersons of the world, that type of thing, where you see guys where I'm more apt to say, I'll give up Gunnar Henderson 2 years before, he's going to be good for somebody that can add value right now.
Let's talk about inflation in dynasty and keeper leagues. And I think this one is a little bit tougher to talk about because it is so league dependent, and there's a lot of nuance involved in it too. I think something that I've tried to do, at least, the Scott White Dynasty League is kind of its own beast, right? So when I'm trying to figure out how much a player might go for in the auction, I will look back at previous year's auctions to try and find similar players and say, all right, this player went for this much here, but obviously it's just so dependent on how many players are being kept that year. And there's never going to be one right answer. For example, Yamamoto was available in the auction, and there were teams that were out of it, like to start the year. They're just rebuilding teams that say, I'm going to acquire the highest priced pitcher and then trade him immediately after the draft. Yamamoto went for $87 in the Scott White Dynasty League. So it's really hard to talk about this across multiple leagues. But Scott, I think what I've tried to do in the past is look at how much players go for in the previous year to try and give you an idea, although it's not going to be perfect.
No, it's not going to be close to perfect. It's funny. We were doing the Scott White Dynasty League, the free agent draft, which is, done via auction. And I had more spots open than I've ever had before in that league. And so, usually I just go in and I've kind of, my plan in a dynasty league is to always be building for next year. So usually I go into it and I only have 2 or 3 spots to fill, and I just get the best of what I can get for however much it costs me. And it's not a big deal, but I had more like 10 spots to fill this time. And I was getting so frustrated because there was just no standard for comparison. So players were going for certain prices. And I'm like, I have no idea if the other players who would meet the need are going to go for less than that or way more than that, or basically the same amount. Should I be in on this? Should I not be in on this? I don't have a good answer for you because it was driving me nuts. I guess you just have to go in knowing what your needs are and have a certain amount that you're willing to spend to meet that need. And then whatever caliber of player you get for that is who you get. That's probably the best advice I can offer.
Mike, do you have any thoughts? Because obviously you included this on the rundown. So I don't know, like obviously something specific to your league, but is there a way that you have tried to calculate inflation in your league?
No, and I actually kind of like your answer, kind of looking back historically speaking to see what similar players have gone for. I guess it's all about, pre-auction with your keeper list. If you're allowed, 15 keepers or whatever, is try to get as many players under value as you may. So you may go for, a $1 Tyro Estrada versus a $42 Rafael Devers. How are you calculating those things? So yeah, the answer to your question, short, no, I don't have a good idea of how to do it. I just try to get as much value prior to the auction that I know, like, hey, I'm saving whatever $7 on, Estrada versus overpaying and keeping Devers coming into the league.
Let's talk about rebuilding in Dynasty and Keeper League. Scott, you just talked about how you're constantly thinking about the next year. So I don't think that you're ever in a position where you just need to, all right, let me completely tear this thing down and rebuild. But there are many people who do play that way. So how do you attack it?
You're asking me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, partly that depends on the setup of the league too. One of the things I get a lot of grief for in my Dynasty League every year is I don't allow off-season trading, and I understand why that's frustrating, but I've seen in other Dynasty Leagues too often somebody trade away all their prospects to non-contenders who are eager to get whatever they can for the players they're not going to keep. Bring back all this surplus for the current season that takes them to an easy championship, and then in the off season they turn around and sell off all those parts they acquired for the many more hopeful contenders that exist in the off season. So they're winning on both sides of that transaction. Basically, they're buying low on the win now types, and then they're selling at a higher rate those win now types after they've already won. And that just seemed like that doesn't seem to be in the spirit of a Dynasty League to me, where it's more about building a nucleus that sustains you for years to come. So I forget what the broader question is and why I got off on that tangent. What was it we were asking?
It's just more about, I guess, how do you go about rebuilding or retooling, or your general thoughts on all of that?
Yeah. So like I said, I am always, I approach every Dynasty League as in, does this trade help me for next year? Because if you're constantly doing that, then eventually you wind up with so much surplus that you kind of can't lose, even if you're thinking about next year. So, you have so many cheap options for the next year that are also helpful for this year that you can trade away the expensive options for future considerations without really costing yourself in the standings for the current year, if that makes sense. And it takes a while to get to that point, and you have to be dedicated to do it. But I think that's the most effective way to build a true dynasty in a Dynasty League. I'm not saying I never make a trade to bolster my team for the current year, knowing I'm not going to keep this guy that I trade for, but it would have to be something that doesn't really compromise me in the future, or at least, I would say that it has to be something that's not really going to compromise my future. It would have to be like more of a discount situation where a team who's out of contention is just willing to trade this piece for nickels on the dollar.
Mike, do you have any thoughts or questions regarding rebuilding in that format?
Yeah, I think that one of the things kind of leads to the next point is at what time is a good time to make that decision, whether you go all in for this year, because historically speaking in our leagues it is an auction, so guys maintain contract values, but it's one of those that is it a mid-May, is it an all-star break? Because it seems to be you know everybody that is in contention has made multiple trades of giving up prospects, giving up lower dollar value guys for a $70 Acuna to make a run for it the last few months. So I guess that would be my follow-up question would be, at what time is a good barometer to say I need to start making decisions? Am I in it or am I not in it?
So the hard thing there and it's the same thing that you see in the actual trade deadline, is if you want maximum impact for a trade, you should probably do it earlier because you're going to have more time with that player on your team. The problem there is the earlier you're trying to make trades, the less certain you are that you're going to make the playoffs, and the less certain other teams are that they are not. And so finding that window is always super tough. But I think as a general rule, you should be trying to, if you're going to try to improve your roster, you should be trying to do it as early as possible so you can get the maximum impact from it. So you're not, having that lesser player in your lineup for longer. It's just, you might end up having to pay more.
I think it makes a difference too if it's a head-to-head or roto league.
Yes.
And I'm not fond of roto dynasty leagues as a principle because there's no playoffs, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
So every team is out of it. Every team but the couple who are in it are out of it much sooner,
Mm-hmm.
and so it really throws things off. But if it is a head-to-head league, it doesn't make a big difference to me whether I'm first in the standings or sixth in the standings, however many teams make the playoffs in this particular head-to-head league. So I am generally inclined to wait on helping my team at presence to give it as much time as possible to see if it is a true contender or not. Because I don't want to give up future assets if for a long shot bid, if it gets down, if we're closing in on the trade deadline and I'm like, yeah, if I just fill this one need, I think I could be a true contender here, even as the 6th seed or whatever, then okay. But I want it. I am future minded enough that I want to see it play out first before committing to it too early.
I think that's a good point, Scott, between the formats, because in a head-to-head league, the best team doesn't always win.
You just got to be there. Yeah.
As long as you get in the dance, you have a chance. In Roto, if you get to July 1st and you're in 15th place, I think you probably got to be realistic about, all right, what's happening this year?
Well, even if you're in 8th place, it doesn't even have to be that extreme an example.
True. If there are clear, top 3 or 4 teams, I think that's a good point, is being realistic with where you're at and your chances to compete. And obviously that will be dependent on format. But if you see the writing on the wall, instead of waiting till August 1st when, that's the trade deadline, everyone's trying to make trades. If it's July 1st, you're in 8th or 9th, and look, there's 3 teams that are, they have 120 points in the Roto standings, and you probably know, all right, it's not going to happen. Let me try and make moves before everyone else is trying to do the same thing. Mike, you have something on the rundown here called the Ricky Bobby. What do we do with that?
So this is interesting. So this was my first experience in this league, is that I was trying to do some trades at the deadline, and I came across a lot of owners that were, if I'm not first, I'm last. So there are, prizes for 2nd place, 3rd place, 4th place. I think it's top 5 that get, a bonus at the end of it. But it was really weird. I've never experienced this before, that I actually was making deals with guys that were ahead of me in the standings that were quote unquote dumping or tanking, because they were like, if I can't win the whole thing, I'm out. And I was like, that's so foreign to me. I was like, if I can get 2nd place, hey, I'll take it. This is a good year. So obviously without pilfering your entire roster, but I didn't know how commonplace this was in your guys' league.
This is this a Roto league?
Correct.
Okay. So like I said, that adds to that feeling of feeling like you're out of it sooner and not wanting to bother to improve. Even if you're in 4th place, you may feel like you're out of it in the Roto league. So that's why I don't think it's the ideal setup for a dynasty league. I think part of this too, and I know this is going to be an unpopular opinion, is like if you're playing fantasy baseball because you enjoy fantasy baseball and you can take satisfaction in a second place finish in a roto league, because like, I did really well. I almost won, even though it isn't that. This is why I don't generally like to play for money. I understand it adds incentive for people. I understand people use it to supplement their income, but I would rather just play for the sake of the competition, and because once you add money and it's in the money or out of the money, what does it matter if I'm out of the money? It's like a negative incentive for people who would otherwise be competitive, And so that's why I'm not fond of it. I know it's unpopular, but I don't like playing for money.
Mike, let's wrap up with this. I know you're part of something cool going on out there in Arizona, so I wanted to give you the opportunity to plug what you have going on. And what do you got?
Yeah, so I am a commissioner of AZ Play Ball Pony Baseball. We are a baseball league here with about 40 teams. Our home field is under repair, looking to get a synthetic surface in the infield. So we're offering the chance for any listeners that want to help us out in that cause. We're a nonprofit organization. We're looking to get a more playable field and also, spend a lot less money on water. Out here in Arizona, you can imagine to keep a field green in 120 degree temps takes a lot of water. So right now on our website, on www.azplayball.com, we have a donate button up there in the upper left-hand corner. You can click that and make a donation to our league, get you a tax receipt for it and everything. Would be great cause, help out the kids.
Awesome stuff. Appreciate you, Mike. It was a great discussions here between, look, I'm sure things that other people are thinking about, and I'm really happy that you came on and that you made the rundown. So thank you for that.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, guys. Appreciate it.
We're going to wrap there for Scott, Chris, and Mike. I am Frank. Thanks as always for tuning in to Fantasy Baseball today. Please make sure to follow and leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify, and we'll be back again next week. Bye-bye.